looking at the grand scale of Nebraska high school football, there might not have been a more heavy favorite than maybe the Patriots in Class A than Norfolk Catholic in Class C2. It was presumed that they were the number one team and would continue their winning streak into another state title. In Lee Corso fashion, a day before his retirement, not so fast, my friend. Bishop Neumann won it 21-14. This game had a couple of turnovers coming from Norfolk Catholic, an interception early and an interception late, but Bishop Neumann looked like, from all accounts, that they were able to kind of control this game in and out. When there was a response by Norfolk Catholic to go up a score, Bishop Neumann would respond in their own right. Welcome back to Small Town Ball, a podcast presented by Hurrdat Sports and NebPreps. I'm Austin Jacobsen. No interview today because it was, well, a wild week one across really all of 11-man football, but especially in some of our nitty-gritty smaller classes across the great state of Nebraska. And I'm going to try to get into as many classes as we can, but I wanted to give you a quick Labor Day recap of everything you missed. So we will have a great conversation coming up later this week you'll want to stay tuned with maybe one of the bigger upsets of the weekend. But for now, let's recap what we saw in the top 10 and beyond across C1 all the way to 6-man football. So first and foremost, this weekend in its entirety was bonkers. You start, of course, with Nebraska football being on that Thursday night to open up in Arrowhead. A lot of different variety, a lot of different people that were out and about at Kansas City and the Chiefs' home stadium. But there was plenty of great football happening, of course, back in the state of Nebraska. And on that Thursday, there were some pretty prime and key upsets. You add in some of the biggest matchups that happened then on that Friday night too, and it made for a great weekend of high school football. So let's start at the top. In last week's top 10 rating of the Class C1 NebPreps Coaches Poll Top 10, Wahoo handled business. There was no surprise here that the Warriors took down Nebraska City 55-0. But then moving forward, Central City actually played a little bit of a tighter game than maybe what I had anticipated until a little bit later, 38-7 against Ord. Chanticleers put up a good fight, but it was Central City just dominating through all the different aspects on offense from there. Lakeview handled Omaha Gross Catholic at the number 3 spot, 38-9. And we saw our first top 10 matchup of the C1 season occur between Sidney and Cozad, with the Haymakers getting blanked at home 35-0. And, as we talked with our former head coach, or I should say first-year head coach, Jared Crick, earlier in the season, it was already interesting to hear about kind of the dynamic changes that the Haymakers were having to go through defensively and really retooling their offense. Well, it showed with how dominant Sidney was in this game. They're rated number 4 after last week's preseason top 10 by the NebPreps Coaches Poll. You'll see him as low as number 5 in some of the other ratings across the state of Nebraska. I still believe, and not trying to be just a Sidney honk, that this Red Raider team is definitely for real. Alec Doty finished the day 8 of 17 passing for 100 passing yards. He did throw an interception, did not have a touchdown pass, but you look at some of the other playmakers on this roster and offensively, that might have been maybe the bigger question mark for the Red Raiders coming into the season. Their defense was going to be very, very good and have high-profile talent, namely with Kean Kaiser, who we'll get to in a minute. But will the offense be able to make enough plays outside of Alec Doty? Well, Reese Dorsey definitely lived up to the billing there. 17 carries, 118 yards, and a 3-touchdown day for the lunch pail back. Really good stuff from him. Doty also toted the ball 12 times for 30 yards. And how about this from Kyle Jaggers? 2 carries, 45 yards, and a long score. Kaiser recorded 3 receptions for 49 yards and then had 11 tackles on defense as the Iowa State commit recovered a fumble. But Jaggers may be the defensive player of the week in Class C1. 3 interceptions. You don't put up a goose egg on the very start of the season unless some things are going your way, and it definitely went Sidney's way on that very first Friday night. So the top 10 matchup goes Sidney's way, and this was one of the key points of the season when looking at Sidney's entirety. We mentioned on NebPreps postgame with Mike Sauter and Jacob Padilla in their season preview, Sidney has a schedule set up for them that if they were to move past the Cozad game, the rest of the series kind of looks pretty even for them. should be looking at least a one-loss, if not undefeated regular season, of course, avoiding any slip-ups late in October. But that was somewhat of the toughest stretch for the Red Raiders, especially playing mostly a panhandle, if not western central Nebraska schedule. Unlike the Red Raiders, number 5 in last week's coaches poll, Ashland-Greenwood, man, did they put a dominant performance, but do they have a very tough task coming up next week. Ashland-Greenwood handled DC West 48-0, and the stats speak for themselves. They were impressive from the very beginning. Derek Tonjes at quarterback, 10 of 12 passing, 234 passing yards. For those of you staying at home, that is nearly 24 yards per completion. Yeah, he only completed 10 of them, but he only passed for 12. 4 touchdowns. You have Cale Smith with 9 carries, 80 yards, and 2 scores. He also added 60 yards receiving on 2 catches. Cal Kissinger back to his impressive roots with 5 catches for 139 yards and 3 of Tonjes' touchdown passes. The team as an entirety had 3 sacks, 2 picks, and a fumble recovery, with Cale Smith having the interception, Mose having an interception as well. Ashland-Greenwood looking good, but of course, the eyes will all point towards next week. There's really no better C1 area to watch football than Ashland-Greenwood, and it's going to be a loaded stadium there on that Friday night when Wahoo comes into town. It'll be the first test we'll see as well for Wahoo, maybe trying to avoid the number 1 seed plague that we saw, or we will talk about here later on in the show too. Pierce actually, I thought, had one of the more impressive outings. Aurora showed a lot more grit than what I think many people anticipated, and the fight from the Huskies put Pierce back on their heels. The Blue Jays fought back, though, and Pierce was able to win 27-21. They did it on the ground with Caden Fritz, 28 carries, 235 yards rushing, and 2 scores. You added plenty of backs getting a lot of reps in this one. Ryder Thiessen had 9 carries for 61 yards and a score. Brock Collison, 9 carries for 48 yards. The team had a total of 453 rushing yards with just a little over 7 yards a carry. And for all of the grandpas and dads pounding the table saying, we got to run the ball, Pierce is your team. And especially to come out with a victory in that week 1 matchup against Aurora, 27-21, like we had mentioned, pretty good way to start the season, especially the way you're going to be tested. Maybe Class C1's a little bit closer in that dynamic than we had first anticipated. If not, it's going to be a lot more competitive games near that top than maybe we had thought. Week 2 is going to tell us a lot, however. Scotus Central Catholic started the season 1-0. They dominated Aquinas Catholic 49-7. O'Neill won 47-25 over Valentine with Turner Heiss, scoring 4 touchdowns, 3 on the ground with a passing touchdown. Lincoln Christian actually ended up losing to their crosstown rival Lincoln Lutheran 34-12. And of course, we mentioned the haymakers of Cozad falling to Sidney 35-0. So again, the week 1 C1 slate, the biggest ones in my eyes are, of course, the Pierce win, how dominant Ashland-Greenwood was, and, of course, the Sidney victory over Cozad. When you have a top 10 matchup, it's easy to look at that one. That was one of the games of the week that could have potentially turned into maybe one of those closer matchups. But regardless, it was Sidney throughout. It was Pierce at the end, and it was Ashland-Greenwood before the day even started. Now I am so excited. You're going to hear more about this in NebPreps postgame with Jacob Padilla and Damon Benning as well. But man, oh man, the Norfolk Catholic Bishop Neumann game. When I was getting back from a Kauffman Stadium Royals experience on Friday night, holy cow. To just be getting the text messages and the tweets and checking in on what was going on with Norfolk Catholic, the presumptuous number 1. There has not been, even in Class A with Millard South, and I know, small town ball, but looking at the grand scale of Nebraska high school football, there might not have been a more heavy favorite than maybe the Patriots in Class A, than Norfolk Catholic in Class C2. It was presumed that they were the number 1 team and would continue their winning streak into another state title. In Lee Corso fashion, a day before his retirement, not so fast, my friend. Bishop Neumann won it 21-14. This game had a couple of turnovers coming from Norfolk Catholic, an interception early and an interception late, but Bishop Neumann looked like, from all accounts, that they were able to kind of control this game in and out. When there was a response by Norfolk Catholic to go up a score, Bishop Neumann would respond in their own right, getting a long touchdown run and a long touchdown score in their own accord. So what do we learn from this game? Well, we still know that these two teams are going to be two of the best, if not the best in Class C2. What will determine, though, is how interesting maybe the seeding goes through the rest of the season. A lot of ball still left to play for both teams, obviously 8 regular season games to go. But if power points are going to dictate anything, will this game actually determine if we see a rematch of this Bishop Neumann and Norfolk Catholic game in the state championship? Or will now Bishop Neumann's technical upset over Norfolk Catholic pit this maybe closer to a semifinal matchup just due to how power points might fall because of the opponents both will face? Very interested to see how that will shake out as we get closer into especially October. Kearney Catholic saw a lot of highlights from this one. Jacob Bosshammer looked really good as Kearney Catholic won over St. Paul 37-14. The team for the Stars in defense, they allowed less than 200 offensive yards, and those 14 points for St. Paul definitely after Kearney Catholic had already well established. Question here for the Stars, in my eyes, without having seen the all 22 and watched all 60 minutes, is there enough depth for Kearney Catholic to remain at number 3 in the top 10 NebPreps coaches poll rankings? That will be my question mark moving forward. Kearney Catholic's going to have a tough test in a few weeks with Minden, but will some of their next tests, including potentially an Ord team that will be making their due diligence and licking their wounds here soon, will they have another say as to how tough Kearney Catholic's schedule could look? Hartington Cedar Catholic won a tight contest, 21-14 over Boone Central. Grady Haber went 3 of 7 for 38 passing yards. Brayton Whitmore, 15 carries for 81 yards and 2 scores. Brady Hochstein, 11 carries for 49 yards. And Keaton Kaiser, the freshman, really critical score, 3 carries for 23 yards and the touchdown. That was the difference maker. Just 7 points in this one between Cedar Catholic and Boone Central. Defensively, Easton Hochstein had 9 total tackles, with Bodie having an interception, Hunter Benson an 85-yard fumble recovery in the contest. And how about this? Against Boone Central, Hartington Cedar Catholic only allowed 39. That's 39 rushing yards in this contest. Boone Central had to go through the air for this one. Cade Hudson went 20 of 31 for 219 passing yards, a touchdown. He did throw an interception and did run one in, so it was kind of the Hudson show throughout. He was moving the ball back and forth, but his receivers, Brogan Bennis, 8 carries, his back, Bennis, 8 carries for 50 yards. Caden Miller had 8 receptions for 75 yards. And Walker Robertson himself even added a 5-reception day over 10 yards or 12 yards a catch for 88 yards. Darren Dosler had 11 total tackles. Kobe Andreessen had an interception. But it's Cedar Catholic getting the 7-point win, dropping Boone to 0-1. And much like we talked about that Pierce Aurora game in C1, it did feel like, at least from the people that I talked to and some of the people that I had read online from that one, Boone Central is not a team to write off by any means, any regards. And in fact, if you look at that contest and the way people talked about it, Cedar Catholic and Boone Central could be competing for potentially maybe the same spot in the postseason when we get to that moment. Moving further down the list, GICC had potentially the biggest surprise in terms of dominant performances in Class C2. They won 44-0 over Hastings St. Cecilia. This was just one team had the Jimmies and Joes, the others did not, as the Crusaders got 3 forced fumble recoveries. They forced a fumble, 2 interceptions, and by total statistics, only allowed 17 yards of total offense. They had Jack Alberts out there going for 9 carries, 68 yards, and a score. Grayson Sachs started at quarterback, finished 6 of 9 passing for 50 yards, passing and 2 scores. Alberts had 11 total tackles and 4 tackles for loss. It was just living in the backfield for GICC throughout this contest. Battle Creek fell to Cross County 35-14. Tyne Thompson finished 6 of 16 with 152 yards passing and 2 scores. Andy Riccio with 4 receptions and 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. Raymond Central did survive. They won over 42-7 over Fillmore Central. So in the Battle of Central, it turned out to be Raymond with Wyatt Jelinek, 6 of 9 passing, 129 passing yards, and 2 scores. Good defensive standing as well. A lot of guys with multiple tackles, 5 or more. That included Braxton Korth, who had 9, and you had Taver Van Lanningham, who had 9 tackles. Jelinek himself added an interception defensively. Tavian Johnson also had an interception. Good performance there from Raymond Central, winning by 5 scores. And Doniphan-Trumbull, they also could have been up there for maybe one of the more dominant performances. Parker Volk really back in his bag at quarterback with a 36-7 win over Amherst. He finished 22 of 36, which may have been maybe the most passing attempts we saw in C2 for the Friday night matchups. Had 292 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, with Hayden Smith on the ground, 12 carries for 73 yards. Jack Poppy had 13 receptions for 121 yards and 2 scores. And Talon Bennett, this is a stat total you'll love. 6 catches, 160 yards, 3 touchdowns. So when he wasn't just, carrying the ball up and down the field after catching a pass, he was getting it into the end zone half the time too. Pretty impressive performance. They also turned out 3 interceptions for Doniphan-Trumbull. So that's just a quick 11-man recap. But man, did we have a lot going on. None bigger than, of course, the Norfolk Catholic loss. And really, we should be crediting that as more the Bishop Neumann win. But again, very excited to see where the C2 slate now seems like everyone is kind of evening out as we move closer into the second week of the season. All right, done with 11-man. Let's move into 8-man football. And we talked to head coach Andrew Kuda earlier in the preseason, but man, did Sandy Creek perform up to their level. They took down, at the time, number 8 Johnson Brock in a 56-26 victory over JB. Cam Seeley replacing Ethan Shaw. Nothing to worry about in this one at all. If you're a Sandy Creek fan or if you're a fan of 8-man football, I think it's easy to say that Cam Seeley will be the next quarterback that you have to watch out for. Coming out of Fairfield, 10 of 16 passing in his opening performance as a starter, 191 passing yards, a score, 19 carries on the ground, 191 yards rushing, and 4 touchdowns. The biggest question was, can you replace the offensive productivity that Ethan Shaw gave you? I think firmly the answer is now yes, even if it is after just one single week for Sandy Creek. Now, consistency could be the issue, but if you're looking at total volume, Cam Seeley's got it. And talking to head coach Andrew Kuda before the season even started, it feels very confident that Seeley's going to be able to continue to dominate on that side of the football. Now, the team defense actually held them to 202 total offensive yards for Johnson Brock. And you added even some big play opportunities. Logan Tomke, the receiver, 2 receptions for 85 yards, and Alex Watts, 3 catches, 54 yards, and the score as well for Seeley's 1 lone passing touchdown. I have been getting more and more talk and seeing more in my feed about the number 2 team in the NebPreps coaches poll in Dundy County-Stratton. We talked to Evan Jones of the RPAC Rundown, and we'll catch up with him maybe later on this season about how well DCS was prepared for this year. I think it's safe to say, especially after a couple of other games that we'll get to in just a moment, shook out in 8-man football, DCS is maybe, and probably past that point, clearly the number 2 team in 8-man Class D1. They took down Perkins County by 30, 46-16. Dante Horner finished 5 of 6, 88 yards passing for 3 scores. And the reason I feel so confident in DCS's ability to potentially face off against Sandy Creek, whether it's in Lincoln or a semifinal to get to that state championship game, I believe Dundy County-Stratton maybe has the best player in 8-man football. Ethan Latta had 14 carries, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 receptions, 59 yards, 2 more receiving touchdowns, and he forced an interception defensively. We talked with Evan earlier in the season, one of our first episodes here on Small Town Ball. He told us that Latta might be the best athlete in the RPAC. I might make the argument he's the best athlete in 8-man football. He is a tremendous piece to the puzzle for DCS, and he's going to have to shoulder a lot more of a load than maybe we'll see with some of these other top contenders. But if Ethan Latta keeps performing up to that standard, it's going to be very tough to take down DCS, especially with the way they handled Perkins County in week 1. Now, the biggest upset of the entire weekend had nothing to do with college football, had nothing to do with 11-man football. It was in 8-man football as Bloomfield blanked last year's state runner-up Stanton 30-0. Let me say that one more time. Did you hear that correct? Bloomfield blanked Stanton 30-0. In the past few years, and even in this preseason, you could ask a lot of people, that would have been a surprising result if Bloomfield even had just one. But to dominate and to crush the opposing Stanton Mustangs the way they did, wow. They allowed only 204 rushing yards, scored 3 touchdowns in the contest and were able to hold Stanton to no points in their season opener. Pretty impressive, regardless of how you look at it, if you ask me. We'll talk to Bloomfield head coach Matt Kuchar later on this week, too. You're going to really want to hear that one. I'm very excited for what he has to say, and talking with him a little bit more, also a fellow UNK grad, about how that game performed. And the Bees could be a team that maybe were slept on a little too much because we were looking a little too hard into their schedule. But they faced and passed the first test before the semester really even started. We'll see what else is in store for the Bees. I'm interested. They definitely have more than just a few eyes on them for the remainder of their season. Crofton maybe played the game of the year in week 1 as it was a 4 overtime thriller. They dropped by 2 points to Wynot 78-76, and they allowed 335 passing yards in the game, 7 passing touchdowns. Wynot's Lane Hymas had 4 rushing touchdowns in the contest, but in a 4 overtime game and a game where both teams were playing up to their offensive potential and peak for that matter, you're just hoping to survive. And unfortunately, Crofton did not, but Wynot, man, did they look impressive. You'll see them later on in the top 10 here in just a few moments. Shelby-Rising City took down Freeman, handled business 54-8. Logan Lindsley went 2 for 5 for just 9 passing yards, but he did a lot of damage on the ground. 5 carries, 79 yards for 2 scores. Carter Eichmeyer had 19 carries for 164 yards and 4 touchdowns, as Shelby-Rising City is going to be that next team on the schedule coming up here for Sandy Creek for maybe one of the top games in D1. If Sandy Creek's going to get tested, they definitely had an opportunity to continue to blow the wagons off of Johnson Brock, but they knew what was coming in SRC the next week. And if Shelby-Rising City has a chance to maybe put a little bit of a dent in the armor of Sandy Creek, who knows? We could see maybe the same opportunity we saw in C2 with Norfolk Catholic, Bishop Neumann. North Platte St. Pat's fell to the Panhandle Pride Bridgeport 44-28 as they start their year 0-1. Don't write off North Platte St. Pat's just yet. I think it's too soon to do that. But Bridgeport might get a little bit more love and a little more look there in 8-man football. And who knows, there was a time that a lot of those Western Nebraska teams are being overlooked just purely because of the skill difference a lot of people felt, and namely a lot of the opponents that they played. But Bridgeport opening up their year with a win over North Platte St. Pat's, definitely going to raise a few more eyebrows and put a little bit more love over towards Bridgeport and the Bulldogs for the rest of the season. They are Central, won over Heartland 66-14. The team rushed for 339 rushing yards, had 8 rushing touchdowns in this game, and they won by over 52 points. So if you're also looking defensively, they had that too. The key to really the biggest stretch of this entire season in week 1 in 8-man football was how impressive was your rushing attack, and then how impressive was your defense in forcing turnovers. That felt like the best teams had the best performances in that regard. They are Central, one of them as well. An interception, forced fumble, and 2 fumble recoveries in that win over Heartland. Johnson Brock, as we mentioned, fell to Sandy Creek 56-26. They were the number 8 team coming into the preseason. Lord Central Catholic took down Falls City Sacred Heart 56-14. They totaled nearly 400 rushing yards in their own regard, as Callan Schnitzer, 23 carries, 269 yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground, and Alex Schnitzer, 11 carries, 112 yards, and 1 touchdown. We mentioned that it was almost 400 total rushing yards for both, or for the team. Those two nearly hit the total in their own regard. Again, a 56-14 win over FCSH. And finally, rounding out, Plainview stayed in the top 10, definitely with a victory in a close one over Pender, 29-26. Pender is never anyone you want to write off. Good win for Plainview to open up their season. That was Class D1. Now we run into Class D2. And again, working our way down the preseason ratings of the NebPreps coaches poll top 10. Central Valley. We talked with head coach Craig Bartos the week of the Riverside game last week. I would say that Central Valley and the Cougars were definitely prepared for Riverside. 44-0. Lincoln Nikolajzak, the new starting quarterback, he just had to throw 8 passes, but did put 75 yards rushing on the ground with 4 touchdowns. Luke Shoemaker had 16 carries, 202 yards, and a score. But defense was living in the backfield of Riverside all day long. It was almost the exact repeat of what we saw in that state championship in the 2024 version in November. Will Picorni had 11 total tackles, 5 behind the line of scrimmage, 3 sacks. Caden Straka, 8 total tackles, 6 of them for loss, 3 sacks. And Oakland Soto, you remember Tay? Well, here's Oak, 6 total tackles, 2 for loss, and a half sack as well. The team totaled 7.5 sacks and 15 tackles for loss. Half of the team's tackle for losses were sacks, and the team had 15 behind the line of scrimmage. That is beyond impressive to open up your season. You can give credit to the 44 points put on the board by the Cougars, but Central Valley's defense will ride them into a state championship appearance this season if they can get that far. Archangels Catholic, one of their top competitors, number 2 in the Coaches Poll, 54-0 win over Winside. They allowed less than 100 offensive yards in that game. Not much of a surprise from the former Humphrey St. Francis school. Howells-Dodge, maybe one of the top competitive games in Class D2. In fact, probably the best game if you were watching across the state. They won 28-24 over Lawrence Nelson. And Lawrence Nelson definitely put up a great fight in this contest, but it was Howells-Dodge making a difference on the ground. Oliver Belina had 14 carries for 126 yards, 2 gritty scores. Hunter Luther, 15 carries, 67 yards, 2 touchdowns. And the defense made a lot of big plays when called upon. You had Belina getting 14 total tackles, Luther with 12 total tackles. Luther also added 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. Chase Luther had 11 tackles in the game. Meyer ended up with Dane Meyer, that is 11 tackles and an interception. And he was efficient as well, throwing 3 of 7 for 58 passing yards. So a couple of dink and dunks here and there, but some big gains, 3 passes, nearly 20 yards a pop. Pretty impressive stuff from Howells-Dodge. And if Central Valley is looking behind them in the rearview mirror and they're checking on who's catching up to them, a win over Lawrence Nelson, who was the number 6 team in Class D2, that's definitely going to raise some eyebrows if you're Central Valley. But the Cougars are going to be staring forward the rest of the way. It's going to be a matter of who can catch up to them. And as of right now, Howells-Dodge at that 3rd spot, I would argue that maybe their most battle-tested performance that we have seen from Howells-Dodge, and maybe we'll see from them, could be what vaults them maybe a little bit closer to competing with Central Valley when we get through the season. How about a win for St. Mary's? Number 4, they were 18-13 over Twin Loop. Gage Hedstrom had the start at quarterback, 11 of 20 passing, 126 passing yards, a score and an interception. But did he bring his lunch pail to running the football that day? So not only 20 passing attempts, how about 30 carries? That's volume at its finest. 143 rushing yards, a score, and his favorite receiver, Bybee, 5 receptions, 91 yards, and a score. But defensively, St. Mary's also stepped up in every which way possible. Hedstrom ended up with 18 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and an interception. Just a reminder, Gage Hedstrom was also having the ball in his hands for 50 different offensive snaps, whether he was running the ball or throwing the ball. Then he added 18 tackles defensively and included an interception. So he threw one and got one back. You'd love to see your quarterback be able to do that no matter what level of football it is. Bybee included 11 total tackles, 2 for loss, and a sack. Dalton Hurley had 11 tackles and a tackle for loss. And Eli Banks, really big performance from Banks. Underrated for sure. 8 tackles, half of them for loss, and 2 sacks in the game. And an 18-13 game, putting Twin Loop behind the sticks a couple of times on early downs and ending a couple of drives. Pretty big performance from Banks to be able to get behind the line of scrimmage a few times. We mentioned Wynot earlier. They were at 5th. They will likely move up over Crofton after that 2-point victory, 78-76 in that 4 overtime thriller. Lawrence Nelson was at 6th. They dropped to Howells-Dodge by 4. Loomis blanked Blue Hill, which I love to see this from the Wolves, because the last time we saw Loomis out there, they were upset in a very significant way, in a very, really, no other way to put it, upsetting way for the Wolves. Instead, they turn around and are able to have a pretty good performance, taking down Bloom Hill 46-0. On the opposite side of the Twin Loop loss, Yaha Harris, 9 of 15, 99 yards passing, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. He had himself a pretty impressive performance too. Received an interception as well defensively. The team had 4 sacks recorded in the game too. So Twin Loop, not one you want to write off, but if you're looking at where you feel in confidence ranking, St. Mary's definitely gets that nudge, especially just with the 5-point victory. BDS fell to Elmwood Murdoch 30-16. And of course, Riverside, that number 10 team in Class D2, dropped to Central Valley 44-0. All right, before we get to six-man football, just a quick reminder, if you're looking for game recaps, top 10 coaches, polls, and everything else, you can find it all online at hurrdatsports.com. You can also check out everything you need to know about small town ball at the Hurrdat Sports YouTube channel and, of course, our podcast networks, which you can find on Apple and Spotify. If you're looking for more from me, it's at Austin2Jacobsen on X and, of course, at Hurrdat Sports on all the social platforms, including TikTok, including the Instagram, Facebook, X, and beyond. And, of course, you can follow everything at NebPreps for more on Nebraska high school sports. All right, getting into six-man action, Stewart stayed at the top spot because they dominated Cody Kilgore. Probably the top performance in six-man football. Austin Conant, 11 carries, 112 yards, 3 scores. Owen Lattau, 2 carries, 84 yards, 2 touchdowns. Pretty good ratio there. Cade Rom, 2 carries, 61 yards, and a score. The team forced 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery and a 75-8 win over CK. Stewart, of course, moves on to 1-0. Garden County, they were trying to compete for maybe the top spot. Once again, they win 82-24 over Crawford. Cable Larson, 3 carries, 95 yards and a score. Kyan Kramer, 7 carries, 94 yards, 3 touchdowns. And how about this in the passing game? Jace Robertson had 2 catches, 46 yards, and 2 scores. Again, if you're looking for averages, pretty impressive. Red Cloud was idle. They would stay at number 3. SEM took down Ansley Litchfield 44-12. They forced 2 interceptions, had 2 fumble recoveries. And how about Jordan Scoville? 11 carries, nearly 140 yards rushing, and 4 touchdowns. Very impressed from what I saw in Pawnee City, especially statistically. Archery Kling, hopefully I'm saying that right. For all our Pawnee City fans, make sure you let me know how we're doing there. But Kling, the quarterback, 4 of 6, 139 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and interception. He did carry the ball 11 times as well for 63 yards and a score. Every yard was needed in this one. 28-22 win for Pawnee City over Meridian. Rose carried the ball 22 times for 133 yards. Dylan Lane had 3 catches for 128 yards and 2 scores. Big difference maker, though, I felt was defensively. Kling made his presence felt offensively, but defensively, he was just as needed. 16 total tackles, 1 for loss, a sack, with Dylan Lane adding 14 total tackles, 2 for loss, and both of those required as sacks as well. One of the upsets in six-man football saw Wallace take down Arthur County 44-36. Reese Swanson had a pretty good day for Arthur County, the number 6 team in the six-man poll in the preseason rankings. 15 of 26, 149-yard passing, and 3 touchdowns. On the ground, they had a pretty successful day as well. Grady Gorwill, 19 carries, 78 yards, 2 scores. He added a receiving touchdown with 5 receptions and 58 yards. But it was at the end of the day, Wallace getting the win by 8, 44-36. Colt Franklin, a perfect passing day, 4 completions on 4 attempts, 89 passing yards and 2 scores. Ashton Johns had 22 carries, 189 yards and 3 touchdowns, with Tyson Sullivan, 13 carries, 102 yards. Braden Gardner, 3 carries, 69 yards a score. He also added 3 receptions for 68 yards and 2 touchdowns. And how about Sullivan going on the opposite side defensively? 9 total tackles and an interception. Wrapping up six-man football as well, Southwest was idle. Hay Springs won over Paxton 46-21, and Silver Lake took down Shelton 44-27. I want to shout out my guy, Scott, from NEB High School Football. That's nebhsfb.com. Definitely check out his stuff. He's got stuff from classes A all the way to 6-man, and a couple of shout outs that he had mentioned on here that we didn't get to because they weren't in the top 10 players. How about Will Jansen of Syracuse? He had 240 yards rushing, a pair of scores, in a 32-20 win over Milford. Drew Koulis of Omaha Concordia accounted for nearly 300 yards and 4 scores. He had 3 rushing touchdowns and a passing score as well. And even all the way out west, if you go to Trini Trejo of Alliance, 13 carries for Trejo, 265 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns. Alliance rolled to a 72-24 win over Gordon Rushville as they nearly had 500 rushing yards in the contest. Looking at Class C2, Madden Brabeck of Wood River, 27-6 win over Centura. He had 4 touchdowns, 2 passing, 2 rushing for the Eagles. Gavin Little of Malcolm had 274 yards and 5 touchdowns, 4 over the air, 1 over the ground, in a 49-8 win over North Bend Central. And looking down the list as well, we have Henry Prokop of Lincoln Lutheran, who we mentioned took down Lincoln Christian as they reclaimed the Spirit Sword. 250 yards in total offense, 185 passing, 165 rushing as well. Those for the 11-man shoutouts. Again, big shout out to our guy at Nebraska high school football. That's NEBHSFB. I'm going to shout him out all season long because that man is a grinder. His content is great. Definitely go check him out. And Scott, come on the show. We love you. We love your work. All right, before we wrap up, we went through all the top 10 results of each of the 11-man to 6-man classes in C1 to 6-man. Let's go through your new top 10 standings for the NebPreps High School Coaches Poll. Starting in Class C1, the top stays the same, except a little bit of a switcheroo here at 3. Wahoo, then Central City at 1 and 2. Ashland-Greenwood, after their dominant performance over DC West, moves up to number 3. That bumps Lakeview to 4, Sidney to 5. Scotus Catholic jumps up to 7. Pierce falls a spot to 7, or Scotus Catholic moves to 6. Pierce will move to 7. O'Neill remains at 8. Fort Calhoun and Roncalli Catholic, who are both receiving votes at the end of last week, now bump into the 9 and 10 spots. They replace Lincoln Christian and Cozad, who did not receive any votes in this week's poll, but Aurora does receive votes despite a loss. Boys Town went 1-0. They receive votes. Gothenburg and Minden, the others, receiving votes in the top 10 for this week in C1. Of course, C2, obvious new number 1, Bishop Neumann. They were 2 last week. They're 1 this week. Norfolk Catholic doesn't fall far. They drop to number 2. Hartington Cedar Catholic jumps up a position to number 4 after taking down Boone Central, with Kearney Catholic now at the 4th spot and being replaced by Cedar Catholic at 3 from last week. Boone Central, despite losing, moves up from number 6 to number 5. GICC jumps a spot to 7, or it falls from 5 to 7. Raymond Central is now number 8. Doniphan-Trumbull remains at 9, and Archbishop Bergen is now at number 10. So we do see a couple of movement there, as a little bit more coming from C2, just a little bit of shifting here and there. Battle Creek and Malcolm do continue to receive votes in this week's poll. For Class D1, no surprise at the top. Sandy Creek, Dundy County-Stratton. Shelby-Rising City moves from 5 to 3. Bloomfield, as mentioned, went from receiving votes outside the top 10 to number 4. Crofton, now at number 5, as they are Central at 6. Bridgeport at 7. Plainview at 8. Johnson Brock at 9. And Stanton at number 10. We look now for the receiving votes. Hartington Newcastle will be in the receiving votes. Lord Central Catholic there too. North Platte, St. Pat's, and Sutton all receiving votes from there. As we look down to 8-man 2, Class D2 action, Central Valley remains at 1, Archangels Catholic at 2, St. Mary's at 3, Howells-Dodge gets bumped down a spot despite what I feel was maybe the more impressive victory of the two. St. Mary's taking down Twin Loop, and of course Howells-Dodge winning over Lawrence Nelson, but those two flip spots, St. Mary's at 3, Howells-Dodge at 4. Wynot remains at number 5, Loomis at 7, Lawrence Nelson at 6, Hitchcock County goes to number 8, Creighton at 9, Elmwood Murdoch at number 10, and dropping out of the polls but still receiving votes, Twin Loop, Lyons Decatur Northeast, Boncroft, Rosalie, and Bruning, Davenport, Shickley. For the 6-man standings goes Stewart, Garden County, Red Cloud, SEM, Pawnee City, Wallace, Southwest, Hay Springs, Silver Lake, Arthur County, and Layton receiving votes as well. No movement there inside of the top 10, other than Wallace jumping up to number 6, of course. Southwest was at number 10. They moved to 7. Hay Springs remains at 8. Silver Lake at 9. Arthur County falls from 6 to 10. All right, that's going to do it for this recap of week 1. Can't promise that every week we'll have a recap or a preview, but we do want you to know that you can always check these things out at hurrdatsports.com and, of course, on all the Hurrdat Sports and NebPreps social channels. So, for myself, Austin Jacobsen, we will have more episodes of Small Town Ball coming out this week with more exclusive interviews, including more content that you need to see of all the best storylines coming out from across our state of Nebraska. So, until next time, stay tuned. Let's keep it small, and let's have another great week of high school football and high school sports across this state of Nebraska.